when we first started our podcast, we had to get like probably 3 or 4 different websites and services going at once to record it, to edit it, to host it, and then have it approved through iTunes. And now we use Anchor by Spotify, where it's just a one-stop shop where you can record, edit your podcast, and when you distribute it, it'll go to all the platforms. So it's just everything right in one place. And the best thing is it's totally free. So if you want to get started, if you're on the fence about starting a podcast, or if you have a podcast and you want to make it simpler, download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started.
Welcome to the Think Fitness Life podcast, where we bring the mind, body, and gym together so you can improve your health, increase performance, and live your best life. For more information, visit thinkfitnesslife.com. Here are your hosts, Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie.
Think Fitness Life podcast with Matt Gluckman and Eric Menchie. Today we're talking about the top 2 roadblocks for busy professionals. And we had a tough time actually coming up with the top 2 because there were a lot of problems that we see across the board with some of our clients in person. But we boiled it down because some of them connected with each other, and we kind of have 2 broad categories for the top 2 roadblocks for people. So if you aren't someone who struggles with stress or struggles with time management and getting your workouts in on a consistent basis, then this probably isn't going to be the episode for you. But if you're somebody who does struggle with stress and finding the right time for your workout, then we may be able to provide some solutions for you. First off, I just want to start by telling you why it's so important to handle your stress and handle your scheduling. It comes back to 2 major things. Number 1, cortisol. Cortisol is going to store more fats and burn more muscle. So if you wake up and you start your day already stressed out by looking at your phone that you have 100 messages, or jump right up out of bed because you know you have to get going as fast as possible, then odds are you're probably having cortisol run through your system more than it should throughout the whole day. And then you're in this hypercortisolemic state, which is just going to be constantly fighting against you reaching your goals. Another reason why stress is the silent killer is going to lead to bad decisions later in the day, either nutritionally because you feel so at wit's end that you just grab what's ever near you without really thinking, or you're going to grab things that are a little bit more comfort food because you're already stressed out. Or it's going to lead you to having a drink after 5 o'clock, which we can go into a whole other podcast about how alcohol affects the body and prevents you from reaching your goals. But then it's also going to then innately lead you to poor nutrition. And, you know, I'd actually like to open up the microphone for Menchie to go into cortisol and some of the detriments that it can have on people's systems.
So it's natural. We need to have cortisol when we wake up in the morning. It's a hormone that we need to have. I think a lot of people get kind of turned off when they hear cortisol. They think it's always bad, which is not the case. But we live in a society, in a world where we are creating a high functioning cortisol level. So high levels of glucocorticoids, which are many different hormones in the body that are a response to stress. The body needs to ebb and flow. It needs to have these to turn on and then needs to shut off. When they don't shut off, these are the things that we see at night where people can't turn those cortisol level down, that where we're staying up, we're staying active, we're exposing ourselves to too much blue light, televisions, phone screens. That can all throw off our circadian rhythm and our rhythmic body functions. So it's cyclical. Our bodies run off cycles. You know, cortisol has to dial up in the morning to get us up out of bed and produce the energy to do our daily tasks. But then at the end of the day, we need to be able to turn that dial down, recover, and replenish. And one of the big things cortisol has, and a lot of people forget about this, that underlying is with the brain. So repeated stress over many days, or when glucocorticoid levels remain high because of adrenal overactivity or poor shutoff of the stress response, We throw off the diurnal rhythm, but there's atrophy of pyramidal neurons of the hippocampus, which means cells are dying in our brain. Think about that. So when we talk about dementia, Alzheimer's, stress plays a role in that. When we talk about
Mm.
type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain, this is what we're referring to is cortisol levels stay so high that we're actually costing brain cells. We are losing glial cells. We are losing our protective cells of our brain and neurons to function. That becomes problematic. So when, yes, people need to understand cortisol's good and bad, but when it stays elevated, it becomes really bad.
Yeah. And I probably should have said chronic stress versus just stress in general. But
Well, no, I think people get that. I just think when people hear cortisol, right, you write down like, oh, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad. It's bad. It's like, no, it's good because you need it to produce energy and do all that stuff. But when we're talking things chronically, then
right.
that becomes bad.
Well, just like the classic line about health and fitness and mobility, it's like there's no bad position, only the one you can't get out of. So
Correct.
if you're stuck in that cortisolemic state, that's when it becomes problematic. And that's why it's so often vilified, because usually when you're having the conversation with somebody about cortisol, it's because it's a negative issue in their life. So we'll get to solutions here in a second, but the other one, along with stress, I think it also we also need to kind of go back for a second before we move on to the other problem. Stress is also going to be a precursor to hypertension, which will increase your risk for cardiovascular issues,
Mhm.
and that's the number one killer in America.
Yeah,
So
it's
go ahead.
stress. It's one of these things where it's like you need to be able to control it because if not, the allostatic load of this thing is just going to bury you, right? And we have you mentioned like this the seeking behaviors. That's just not coincidence, right? When we have high levels of cortisol rolling through our system, that is going to drive an innate survival behavior of metabolism to seek foods that are going to be
Mm,
promoting
comfort.
gluconeogenesis, right? Comfort foods, storing fat, fatty foods. That's why these decisions start to get made because the body thinks it's dying, right? Or it's stressed and it's like, okay, I need energy if you're going to keep doing this. But what happens? People go, okay, the brain goes, go find those foods. Go find these high energy foods, sugar, processed foods, candies, or these high fat foods because that's going to satiate them. And what happens? The energy never gets used, so it just gets stored and it's cyclical. Where he's saying is chronically, those levels just keep rising and the body has to adapt to it. It has to change to it. So it keeps pumping out higher levels.
And the reason I bring this up is because about 3 years ago, an article came out on Business Insider that talked about how bankers in their 20s and 30s had an increase in cardiovascular events, specifically heart attacks. And certain publications of cardiologists, consultant cardiologists, would state that they estimated a 10% rise in heart attacks among bankers under the age of 30. And that's pretty amazing because it shouldn't be happening at that young of an age. And you just start to, when you start to see that happening, seeing a trend like that, you start to have to zoom out and see what's going on. And it is directly related to stress. So that's why it's a silent killer, and it's why it's the number one of our two roadblocks for busy professionals today here in this podcast. And like I said, before we get into solutions that we've seen with our clients and also just throwing out different tips and notes that may work for other people out there, I want to talk about the second roadblock, which will be time. Now, it goes without saying that time is a finite commodity. You don't get any of it back. You can't create it. There is no price point on time, right? It's invaluable. A lot of pun intended, a lot of the time what we see is people using that as their excuse for not taking care of themselves. And I think it goes hand in hand with stress because when they're under heavy loads, under heavy pressure, all free time or all available time no longer free to anything except for their tasks that they need to take care of with their business or with their family or whatever it may be. But that perception of feeling like you have no time is also a precursor to knowing that that person is extremely stressed out. But you have to remember that the the more you can stay consistent with your habits of taking care of your muscle, taking care of your heart and lungs, taking care of your circulation, taking care of your nutrition, taking care of your sleep, is just going to allow you to perform that much better. When I see it so many times when people just work themselves into the ground until they're sick. Like literally, people have gotten sick when they get stressed at work and have to work like around the clock and miss some sleep. And now it just sets them back that much further, and they're just barely scraping by until they feel good enough to get back on their horse and get back on their schedule and their routine with their sleep, their diet, and their exercise. So it's such a catch 22, because I get it where you don't feel like there are hours in the day, but that's just already showing that you're at a maxed out position with your stress and your system already.
And that's one where you have to a little step back and sit down. And do you kind of need to create more time in your day? And that's a hard thing to do and hard thing to kind of tell people sometimes. And it's sitting them down or just having conversation with them or yourself, being like, okay, what do I allocate my time to? Right? How much time do I spend watching TV at night? How much time do I spend doing this? How much time do I spend sleeping? Right? I feel like a lot of times, and it all plays a role. Like systems all play a role. If you're super stressed, you're probably going to be more of a lower state. So almost, I wouldn't say depressed, but like, low motivation, low drive. That's what like stress does. It's going to drop the system down. So what does that promote? That promotes you staying in bed longer. You might sleep a little bit longer than you need to, right? Maybe outside the ideal. You might not get enough sleep because you're spending too much time at night in front of the TV. So that's like a big factor that I think a lot of people need to realize. It's like, where can you create more time in your day and move things around to get things done that you need to, aka taking care of your health, your mental state, so your well-being of your mind. Because if you don't take care of that, further down the road, there's going to be more problems that stem from that.
Yeah, it's like a lot of the people that I work with and business owners that we work with really truly care about their company and their product or their service that they're creating, and they really want to help the market or their prospective clients, whatever field they're in. But they have to help themselves first, and so many people lose out on that at some point in the in the weeks and the months are okay every now and then, but on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, that's when you get into problem and you get into these negative feedback loops where you're not breaking out of the cycle, and the line is you're hacking at the branches rather than hacking at the root. So a big piece is recognizing when you get to that point of saying I don't have time for anything, well then clearly you need a moment on your weekend to reassess and realign it and maybe fix up your approach a little bit, because there is time. And if you feel like there isn't any time to do anything, then you probably are working harder, not smarter. And I think a big one that I've seen some entrepreneurs coming up in like startups that has really opened their eyes was when they invested in themselves and got themselves like an executive assistant or a virtual assistant, whatever it may be that they could afford. But they realized how much time it freed up for their plate to do the things that they're best at, rather than thinking that since they're the CEO, they need to do everything all themselves. That's the point. You get to delegate. You get to be the one steering the ship and calling the shots. So it's important to have a team. Every successful venture has a team. Nobody does it on their own. Everyone's always standing on the shoulders of giants. Nobody changed themselves as a baby.
And there are people who figured out, right? We work with people who figured out that time, and it can be done. And I think the tough thing is like you can't you can find more time in a day, but you can't create more time. No one can, right? Time is ever moving. We all have the same amount. So we can look at people who've done it, people out there who have maximized their health for what they want to accomplish. Now, there always are trade-offs. At the beginning of anything, you might have to sacrifice a little bit more time to get to where you need to be. But once you're where you need to be able to maximize your time. And whether it's life, career, family, focus, like through centuries, people have figured this out. Humans have figured it out. So it's hard to hear as an excuse at times. You know, people say, "Oh, I don't have time." It's like, well, you kind of do. You're just not using your time wisely. And an unfortunate aspect of time and technology that we have is these apps, right? Social medias, these time just vacuums that just take the time away from you without even realizing it. That's another thing just people need to be aware of. How much time are you spending on your phone that's either are you talking to a family member, or are you talking to someone else, or are you just aimlessly scrolling through apps and not doing yourself justice where you could have taken that hour and worked out? How many times have I heard that from clients or friends being like, "Oh, I had time in the morning, but I was on my phone for an hour and I wasted that hour."
Yeah.
It has to be prioritized early. And for me, that is my go-to. Like if you wake up earlier, you prioritize your time in the morning, then at night you have that ability to maybe do the things you want to do, right? So you can't get up and do the things you want to do and then be like, oh, at night you have to jam everything in. Because I think that's where a lot of people get stressed. You know, it comes 5 p.m. All right, they're done with work. Oh, I have to go to the gym. I have to, get the kids. I have to do dinner. I have to do all these things. But if you did some of them earlier in the day or early in the morning, it would be less stress on your body. But a lot of times as we've gone through life, humans become these giant procrastinators.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we get back, we'll talk about the solutions to the top 2 problems for busy professionals. Hey, listeners, just letting you guys know that my team and I are looking for 5 hardworking, determined men or women who want to improve their performance mentally and physically. We've constructed a 90-day program operated by 4 expert coaches to guide you along in the areas of weight training, conditioning, nutrition, and recovery. With scientific and clinical research, we will be coaching you to the most optimal routine, allowing you to feel, look, and operate at your best. If you're interested, please send an email to thinkfitnesslife@gmail.com with the subject determined. Thanks for listening. And welcome back to the Think Fitness Life podcast. Today we're talking about top 2 roadblocks for busy professionals. If you're just catching in, we'll get you caught up with stress and time. We're going to talk about solutions that we have seen either for ourselves or for our clients. And we'll start with stress. Eric, you want to start off?
Ooh. So I'm going to save the meditation part for Matt. That's his spiel.
That's my little golden ticket.
Love it. Got to have it. It's huge. It's important. The other ways to diminish stress, or just kind of recognizing when you are in that stressed out state, right? That's the most important, in turning down that dial from I'm always super stressed to I can manage it. So you want to flip a switch from on and off, on and off. Stresses will come in life. They're natural. Things to do at night for stress is I am highly big into the blue blocking glasses, or putting the iFlux or a dimmer on screens, televisions, computers, or just eliminating blue screens about 2 hours before you go to bed. People don't really understand the dynamics of that, but that is huge for the body to really turn off the stress hormones from upregulating. That's a simple one. The other ones are obviously physical activity. So exercise, working out, that can help regulate the stress in the body and help regulate those hormones. Yes, you are adding some physiological stress to it, but it can help the body. Another thing that touches where Matt's going to go, but not really, is just breathing. Like if you're stressed, you can literally just take 5 minutes. It could be a minute or two out of your day in that moment and focus on controlled breathing, because breathing is going to affect the autonomic nervous system, which is going to help turn that dial from stressed and on down. It might not shut it off completely, but if you can turn that down, perfect. And something simple as 4-second inhale through the nose, hold your breath for 4 seconds, exhale, not forcefully, just exhale that air out for 4 seconds. Your standard box breathing, running through cycles of that for about 2 minutes can change your physiological state. And that's one of the biggest things that I push for people who are in stressed out positions or states, or they need to make a big decision of stress, right? We've all been there where you have to make a huge decision before you make a quick rash decision. Okay, you go, all right, couple deep breaths, breathe it out, turn the body down. The last thing when it gets to with stress is the eating. This is the biggest thing, because I find when people are stressed, they want to feel comfort foods. I know you talk about big into comfort foods and why we go there. It's going to be a hard mental decision, but you really have to think about not in the moment, but in the future. Okay, are these foods going to benefit me in any way? Most likely it's going to be no. So you have to say no to the food cravings when we're in that stressed out state. That is going to be huge to keep turning that dial down.
You know, you're onto something, the whole exercise thing. That's a really good point. It's just, I think a big piece that I see, and it's so funny when we come together with different topics like this, because we see it from a different angle. And I see the side where exercise is what they need, but it can't be that high intensity stress type of exercise.
Correct.
Because they're already in that chronic stress state. But some people, they're just mildly stressed and they can't seem to focus on the present moment, but it's not super detrimental to their system. And yeah, just going for a run or lifting some weights allows them to be present for that exercise, which is all they needed to tackle what was ever on their plate before they started working out. But I guess I want to talk about the side of people who are hyper stressed, chronically stressed, and unable to shake it. And a big piece that the breathing is bringing to us is to center ourselves, center our system. When you're linking up your mind and body, it's happening when you actually focus your attention to your breath. And not to get philosophical or religious or anything, meditation is a perfect tool to help people stay present, because stress is usually about things that have already happened. So there's nothing you can really change about the event happening. There are ways that you can remedy or fix something in the future, but if you can't do it right there in that very moment, and you have allotted an hour and scheduled that hour to work out, then you need to put that aside for now. It's not going anywhere. It'll come rushing back when you're done your workout, trust me. But you need to get that time in for yourself. And you need to get your body working, get your mind operating at its optimal state, so that you can perform at your best. And I think a big reason why I talk about meditation a lot is because of its profound benefits, especially for people who are under so much pressure from needing to succeed in their field, needing to succeed for how large their company is, needing to succeed for whatever state of funding they're in. And I just want to share 3 really popular quotes. One of those by Mark Twain. "My life is a terrible tragedy, most of which have never happened." James Joyce, he says, Mr. Duffy lived a short distance from his body." And then the Buddhist texts, which they would say, "The mind is a great servant, but a terrible master." And it's about having a comfort zone in your mind, in your nervous system, to jump away from, to allow yourself to go to that high stress state, but then always have to come back. Again, stress isn't a bad thing. Anger isn't even a bad thing. But when you can fuel it or if you can't fuel it in a positive way to work for you, then sure, then it's a bad thing. It's only fine until it's not fine anymore. So when you can transform that stress in a way that it works for you versus against you, then it's not a bad thing. But a lot of people lack that comfort zone, that space where they can come back to. So instead of being able to pull out of that high stress state, they need to their brain innately brings them back to, this makes us feel not stressed anymore. Mac and cheese or pizza or bread or coffee or a cigarette or a cocktail. Those are the things in our central nervous system that are already primed with minimal stress. So that's what our body is wrongfully thinking as the only way to get us to that comfort zone again. But with a simple process of, and we'll get to time here in a second, and I want to wrap this up pretty quickly here, but when you sort out your schedule accordingly and you consolidate your time accordingly, now you no longer have the problem of lack of time. But if you can spend 10 minutes of the time that you spend with yourself and your health and your exercise to meditate, and I highly recommend Jack Cornfield, Tara Brock, Mindfulness Daily. It's a 40-day course, 10 minutes a day, and they build upon it. You get that 10 minutes of just winning the morning and starting the day off, of having that practice to have a rest in your being, to be more centered, to be unshakable. It doesn't mean that nothing's going to move you anymore, but it's going to help you in your ability to be that unshakable object that gets whipped and thrown back and forth, but then still settles back into yourself and knows what's best, and be able to see everything with a fresh ear and a fresh eye. That's the beauty that meditation is going to bring to the table. So that's my biggest solution for combating stress, is having a dedicated practice to meditation at least 5 days a week on your work days, right? 10 minutes first thing in the morning. I would totally use that as here we go, transitioning into the solution for time. I would totally use that as a cool down for my workout. Spend 5-10 minutes getting warmed up, spend 40-50 minutes in your actual workout, spend the 10 minutes at the end shutting down your system. So you use that heightened cortisol state from your morning, answering emails, answering texts, whatever. You go into your workout, you're super high functioning, spiked cortisol, high stress, but you're consolidating it accordingly on your system the way you want it to be. And then you're shutting down your nervous system to be more parasympathetic, to be in a calmer state, so that you can function at that 100 miles an hour at work, but your motor's only going at 2,000, 3,000 RPMs, rather than redlining and leading you to burn out by the end of the day. So I kind of threw my solutions there hand in hand, but it does come down to consolidating your schedule and having a dedicated practice to breathing. And sometimes that evolves into driving meditation, a walking the dog meditation, but it's building that comfort zone for your system, for your body, so that when you get to that high stress state, instead of your body saying, I need that cookie, I need that drink, I need that pizza, it's gonna say, I just need to breathe and everything's good, and I'm good, and I can operate at my best. So those are my two solutions for the two problems for busy professionals. Did you want to say anything else, Eric, to wrap up?
I like how you blend it, because people need to realize that this system is not an individual part system. Everything, when it comes to health, fitness, and mind and all this stuff, it all functions together. It's not change one thing and this thing's going to happen. And I think people get lost in that aspect, right? If I just change one thing. Now, I'm not saying changing one thing if your life is bad. Some people need to start there. But I think people need to realize that it kind of all melds together. If you want to change time, you can change time with other aspects. And it just overflows. It's all cyclical. And for time, my biggest thing is just you need to create more. Like Matt said, you need to create more and utilize your time the most efficient way possible. And sometimes that's going to be going without things you might enjoy. Instagram, TikTok, whatever you know, there's, but in the long run, once you figure that out, you will have created time, certain days or parts where you can just say, I have this time. I've done everything I need to do. That's where we need to get people. That's where people need to get to, not the other way around. But it all comes full circle. They all influence each other. Stress, time. It's a dichotomy, right? It's back and forth. We're always against time here. No matter what, we're always trying to figure out how to maximize it and be most efficient.
When you're too stressed, you won't have any time.
Nope, not one bit.
Well, that wraps us up here for the top 2 roadblocks for busy professionals. Find us on LinkedIn, Think Fitness Life, or join our Facebook group, Think Fitness Life, for more information on how you can be the best operator, both mentally and physically, that you need to be. Hope you enjoyed. Catch you next time.
If you're ready to make steps towards improving your health or increasing your performance, book a free 30-minute call today by visiting thinkfitnesslife.com.